My name is Maya Coleman, Black American, and I never imagined the happiest day of my life would turn into a memory I'd spend years trying to wash out of my skin. When I woke up that morning in Atlanta, the sky over the United States of America was clear and bright, and I took it as a sign. I lay there in the hotel room, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heart race and repeating little prayers under my breath. I wasn't just getting married. I was crossing a line between the life I knew and a life I'd only ever seen in magazines and movies, ballrooms, designer dresses, and a family with more money than I could truly understand. The ballroom downtown looked like a scene from one of those movies set in rich corners of America or Europe. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, throwing light onto white roses and tall candles arranged on round tables. A live band played soft jazz near the corner, and waiters in black vests moved like shadows between the guests. My dress cost $4,500, more money than I'd ever worn on my body, and every time I thought about that price tag, my stomach flipped. I kept smoothing the fabric over my hips, touching the ring on my finger, reminding myself this was real, that I was now Daniel's wife, part of his world, part of his family, at least on paper. Daniel came from old money, the kind that stretches back over generations. His family owned apartment buildings, restaurants, and a large real estate company that had its name on billboards across the city. I had grown up seeing their logo on signs and never once imagined I'd marry into that family. His mother, Victoria, walked around the ballroom like she owned not just the venue but the whole of Atlanta. She wore a fitted navy gown and a string of pearls that probably cost more than my car. From the first day we met, she had looked at me like I was a stain on her perfect white tablecloth. Once, I overheard her telling Daniel that I was too loud, too bold, and from the wrong side of town, as if I were a problem to be fixed instead of a person he loved. Still, I believed that love could smooth out the rough edges. I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed polite enough, and smiled through enough tight-lipped dinners, she would eventually accept me. I thought our new house in a quiet Atlanta suburb, a 2-story brick place with black shutters, a small porch, and a front yard I dreamed of filling with bright flowers meant we were truly building a life together. We had signed the papers together too, even though most of the $380,000 purchase price had come from his side of the family. I told myself it didn't matter whose money it was. We were a team, right? That is what marriage is supposed to be. By the time the ceremony ended, I was tired down to my bones. My feet ached inside my heels, my cheeks hurt from smiling, and my stomach was tight and restless. I was a few months pregnant, something only Daniel and I knew. I'd imagined telling our families in a sweet moment later that night, maybe raising a glass of sparkling juice and announcing it with a laugh. Instead, I gingerly rubbed my belly when no one was looking, silently promising the little life inside me that I would do my best to keep her safe, even if I didn't yet know how. The reception was in full swing when I decided I needed to sit down. People were dancing, laughing, and drinking at the bar. The band had switched to a faster song, and the room hummed with energy. At the main table, Daniel sat with his parents and a few important relatives. They looked like a royal family being watched by their court. I spotted an empty chair next to him and felt a small spark of happiness. I was his wife. Of course, I should be seated beside him. That was where I belonged. I walked toward the table, lifting the heavy skirt of my gown so I wouldn't trip. When I reached the empty chair, I placed my hand on the back of it, already imagining leaning against Daniel, whispering jokes in his ear, pretending for a moment that the tension with his mother wasn't real. Before I could pull the chair out, I heard the sharp, urgent rhythm of heels hitting the floor behind me, like angry drums rolling across the marble. I turned my head and saw Victoria charging toward me, her face twisted into something hard and ugly. For a second, I thought maybe there was a fire or an emergency, some reason for her to look that way. Then she reached me, and all my hopeful excuses disappeared. I barely had time to inhale before her hand shot out. Her palm cracked across my cheek with a sound so loud it swallowed the music and conversations around us. My head snapped to the side, and I tasted blood on my tongue. The ballroom fell silent. Even the band stopped playing mid-song. Everyone turned toward us, hundreds of eyes locking on my humiliation. Then, as if pulled by a string, phones rose into the air. Screens glowed, cameras focused. People watched, but nobody stepped in. It was like a scene from a show, and I had become their entertainment. "How dare you sit in my chair without permission, you filthy girl," Victoria shouted, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. The insult hit me as hard as the slap, the words digging into old wounds I'd collected from a lifetime of being told I didn't belong in certain spaces. A few people gasped. Somewhere to the left, someone laughed. I could hear whispers spreading through the crowd, a low buzz of gossip and judgment. For a long moment, I just stood there, my cheek burning, my eyes stinging, my hand still resting on the back of that cursed chair. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me before anyone else could record another second of this nightmare. But my body refused to move, trapped between the shock of the pain and the weight of all those watching eyes. Slowly, I turned to the one person who should have been my shelter in that storm. Daniel, my husband, the man I had just promised to love and honor for the rest of my life. He sat there staring at the tablecloth like a scolded child. He didn't stand up. He didn't reach for me. He didn't grab his mother's hand and pull her back. He didn't even say my name. It was as if he had erased me in an instant, choosing his comfort over my dignity. I searched his face for any sign that he was on my side: anger, frustration, shame, anything, but all I saw was fear and cowardice. I realized then that he wasn't just afraid of his mother. He was willing to sacrifice me to keep her happy. In a room full of people, in front of his friends, co-workers, and clients, he let his mother strike his wife and call her filthy, and he chose silence. Something inside me cracked, but it wasn't my pride. That had already been battered by the slap and the insult. What cracked was the picture I had painted in my mind of our marriage, our future, our so-called partnership. The image of us as a united team, building a life together in that beautiful brick house, shattered like glass dropping onto a marble floor. I finally let go of the chair and straightened my back, fighting the urge to cry. Crying would have given them another show, another reason to label me as dramatic or weak. Instead, I swallowed the pain and the embarrassment and stood as tall as I could. My cheek throbbed, my heart ached, and my baby fluttered inside me like she could feel my distress. In that moment, surrounded by money, power, and cold eyes, I understood something I didn't want to face. I had married into a family that wanted my obedience, not my love. They wanted me to be quiet, grateful, and small. And if I dared to take up space, even something as simple as an empty chair next to my own husband, they were ready to remind me, with their hands and their words, exactly where they thought I belonged. Life in the house after the wedding never matched the picture I'd painted in my mind. On the outside, everything looked perfect, like one of those glossy real estate photos you see online. The lawn stayed trimmed, the flowers by the front steps stayed bright and neat, the shiny black car sat in the driveway like a trophy. Neighbors would wave and smile, probably thinking we were another happy couple in a beautiful Atlanta suburb, living the dream. Sometimes I'd wave back from the front porch and wonder what they would think if they could hear what was said inside those brick walls. Inside, it was a different world. The house felt like a museum where I was the exhibit that didn't belong. I tried to make it mine at first. I hung up a few framed pictures from my childhood me with my cousins in an old neighborhood park, my mom smiling over a birthday cake we could barely afford. I bought a bright yellow mug that said "Good morning, beautiful," and used it every day, even when I didn't feel beautiful at all. I cooked meals that reminded me of home: fried chicken, baked macaroni, cornbread, greens. For a little while, those things made the place feel warmer, softer, like I could really build a life there. Then Victoria started visiting. She never called first. She just showed up, walking through the front door like she still owned the keys. She'd sweep into my kitchen with that strong perfume cloud and sharp eyes, taking everything in at once. She moved things around without asking, like the house itself was out of order because I lived there. She opened cabinets, judged the cheap spices I bought, and made a face at my yellow mug as if it offended her spirit. One afternoon, while I was rinsing dishes, she took that mug out of the cupboard, frowned at it, and set it aside like trash. "You should be grateful, you know," she said, leaning her hip against the counter like she paid rent for my space. "Girls like you don't usually get houses like this. Girls like you." I heard that phrase so many times it started to echo inside my mind, even when she wasn't around. It became a dirty little song I couldn't turn off. Girls like you don't get houses like this. Girls like you don't marry men like my son. Girls like you should remember where you come from and be quiet. At first, Daniel tried to smooth things over. He'd tell me to ignore her, that she'd come around eventually, like this was just some long, uncomfortable phase we had to push through. But the more she visited, the more he sounded like her. Her voice slid into our conversations even when she wasn't in the room. It was like she lived in his phone, his thoughts, his spine. When I told him the baby kicked for the first time, we were sitting on the couch. I grabbed his hand and placed it on my belly, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were on the same side again. His face softened, and he smiled with real joy I hadn't seen in weeks. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his mother's name lighting it up like a warning sign, and I could almost see his expression change in real time. The light in his eyes faded, and his hand slipped away from my stomach. That night, after dinner, he sat at the edge of the bed with his shoulders tense. I was folding baby clothes my friend had given me in a second-hand bag, tiny onesies that made my heart ache with a mix of fear and love. He cleared his throat. "You know," he said, without looking at me, "my mother thinks the timing is strange." I paused, a little pink onesie in my hands. "Strange how?" "She thinks we should double-check that the baby is mine." For a moment, I actually laughed. The sound came out rough and surprised. "You're joking, right?" I said. "Daniel, we've been together for years. We lived in that small apartment before this. When would I have had time to live some double life?" But he wasn't laughing. His jaw was tight, and he finally looked at me. There was doubt in his eyes, and it felt like a slap I hadn't prepared for. "You think I would lie about something like this?" I whispered. My hand rested on my round belly, as if I could shield our child from his words. He shrugged, like he didn't want to own what he was about to say. "You came from nothing, Maya. People do things when they want a better life." Those words hurt more than anything his mother had ever said. Coming from her, it was cruelty. Coming from him, it was betrayal. I stared at him, feeling the air leave my chest. I thought of all the nights I stayed up with him while he worked, all the meals I cooked, the support I gave, the faith I had. And now he compressed my whole existence into a simple idea. A girl from nothing, using him for something. A few days later, the stress caught up with me in a way my body couldn't ignore. I was only 7 months along when the pain started in my lower back. At first, it felt like a dull ache, the kind I could blame on bad sleep or too much time on my feet. I tried to push through it, washing dishes, folding laundry, making the bed. But the ache grew sharper, stronger, more frequent. By the late afternoon, it was like someone was gripping my spine and squeezing hard every few minutes. At first, I told myself it was just the normal discomforts of pregnancy. I didn't want to give anyone another reason to call me dramatic. But when one of the pains hit so hard I had to grip the kitchen counter with both hands and breathe in short, shallow gasps, fear finally broke through. "I think something's wrong," I told Daniel, who was standing by the window, scrolling on his phone. "The pains are close together. I need to go to the hospital." He frowned, barely looking up. "My mother says it's probably fake contractions. She said you should calm down, lie on your side, and drink water." Another pain twisted through me, even sharper this time, dropping me to my knees on the hardwood floor. My hands slapped against the cold wood as I tried to keep from screaming. Sweat broke out on my forehead. My vision blurred. "Please," I gasped. "I need help." He kept pacing, phone in hand, caught between his wife and his mother's voice on the screen. And then I understood. I couldn't trust him to choose me, not even when I was doubled over with pain, carrying his child. An hour later, it was the paramedics who came for me, not my husband. The ambulance ride was a blur of siren screams, bright city lights streaking past the windows, and a nurse's calm voice telling me to breathe in and out, in and out. I cried, not just from the pain but from the hollow space in my chest where my trust had been. Daniel wasn't there. At the hospital, the air was cold and smelled like antiseptic. The lights were too bright. Nurses moved quickly around me, checking monitors, asking questions, handing me papers to sign. The doctor, a tall woman with kind eyes, told me I was in early labor. My baby girl was coming whether I was ready or not. I signed forms alone, my hand shaking. I changed into a hospital gown alone, folding my clothes and sliding them into a thin plastic bag. I breathed through the contractions alone, gripping the metal rails on the bed when each wave hit. I pushed and screamed alone, my voice echoing off the walls of that sterile room. When I thought I had nothing left to give, my body kept going anyway. My heart was breaking, but my body was still fighting to bring life into the world. When my daughter finally arrived, she let out a loud, angry cry that filled the room. It was the strongest sound I had ever heard. They placed her on my chest, small and warm and perfect. She was tiny but strong, with tight curls pressed damp against her head and deep brown eyes that blinked slowly like she was trying to understand everything already. Every sharp edge inside me softened the moment I felt her weight on my skin. "It's you and me now, baby," I whispered, my tears falling into her blanket. "Just you and me." Hours later, when the room was quiet and the lights were dimmed, I held her close and let exhaustion settle over me like a heavy blanket. A nurse walked in, holding a brown folder against her chest. Her face was gentle, but there was something sad in her eyes. "These papers came from your husband's lawyer," she said softly. "They said it was urgent." My fingers trembled as I opened the folder. The words blurred for a second before coming into focus. "Divorce papers, filed while I was in labor." On the last page, I saw Daniel's signature, neat and calm, like this was a simple business deal and not the end of a marriage. Not the abandonment of a woman who had just brought his child into the world. I didn't cry, not then. I looked at the papers, then at my sleeping daughter's tiny face, then back at the papers. Something inside me hardened, like metal cooling into shape. If he could walk away that easily, maybe he was never mine to begin with. The next morning, the hospital room felt like a different planet. The night nurse had dimmed the lights hours earlier, so the only glow came from the small TV mounted in the corner and the soft blue numbers on the monitor above my bed. My daughter slept in the plastic bassinet beside me, swaddled so tightly in a white blanket that she looked like a tiny burrito, only her round cheeks and soft curls visible. My body ached in places I didn't know could hurt, and my mind kept circling back to the folder of divorce papers sitting on the rolling tray, like a silent witness to everything I had just been through. I reached for the remote mostly to drown out my own thoughts. I clicked on the TV, not even caring what channel it landed on. The sound of a morning show filled the room, cheerful music, a host laughing about some celebrity couple in New York, an advertisement for a new car. It all felt far away from this little room where I lay in a paper-thin gown, my life split open and rearranged. I shifted a little, wincing at the soreness, and turned the volume up just enough to feel like I wasn't alone. Then the tone of the anchor's voice changed. "We have a developing viral story this morning," she said. "A shocking video of a bride being slapped at her own wedding is now spreading across America and Europe." My heart stuttered. For a second, I thought it was a coincidence, some other bride, some other nightmare. But then I looked up at the screen, really looked, and the breath caught in my throat. It was me. The ballroom flashed across the TV, those same glittering chandeliers I'd admired, the tables with their white linens, the band in the corner. Then the camera angle shifted, and I saw myself in my wedding dress, walking toward the main table, reaching for the empty chair beside Daniel. I watched like a stranger as Victoria came storming in from the right side of the frame. Her hand swung up, then down. The news team played it in slow motion. I watched my own head jerk to the side, the veil shaking with the impact. On the screen, the words appeared in bold letters. "Bride slapped by mother-in-law at luxury wedding guest, video goes viral." The anchor's voice continued, calm and serious. "The clip, filmed by one of the guests, has already been viewed more than 1 million times across multiple platforms. Viewers are calling for accountability from the groom and his family after this shocking display." I stared, my mouth slightly open. Some stranger had held up their phone and recorded the worst moment of my life, then sent it out into the world. Now people in America and Europe were watching me get humiliated while they ate breakfast, sat on buses, or lay in bed scrolling their phones. I felt exposed in a way I didn't have words for, as if someone had ripped the hospital gown open and pointed a camera straight at my bruised heart. But then something unexpected happened. The anchor started reading comments from social media, her voice steady but with a hint of disbelief. "Many viewers are expressing outrage over how the bride was treated," she said. "Some are calling her a hero for staying calm under such humiliation." On the screen, they showed sample comments in neat little boxes. One user wrote, she continued, "That woman doesn't deserve them. She deserves better than a husband who stays silent." Another said, "Imagine slapping your daughter-in-law at her own wedding. Disgusting." And one comment reads, "Someone help that bride. I hope she leaves him and never looks back." I watched those words appear, line by line, and something inside me shifted. For the first time since the slap, since the ambulance ride, since holding the divorce papers in my trembling hands, I felt seen. Not as the poor girl who married into money, not as a girl like you, just as a woman who had been wronged. a human being who did not deserve what happened to her. My eyes filled with tears, but they weren't just from sadness anymore. They were from relief. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't overreacted. It was as bad as it felt, and the world agreed. My phone, lying on the metal tray near the bed, started to buzz. At first, it was one vibration, then another, then a constant stuttering vibration that made the tray rattle softly. I reached over and picked it up, my hands still unsteady. The screen lit up with a long list of notifications, missed calls, messages, social media alerts. Names popped up that I hadn't seen in years: friends from high school, coworkers from my old job, a cousin from Detroit, an old neighbor who had moved to a small town in Ohio. Most of the messages started the same way. Maya, are you okay? I just saw the video. Tell me this isn't real. Some came with angry words for Daniel and his family. Some came with heart emojis and promises of prayers. But they all sounded like something I hadn't heard in a long time: people choosing me, believing me, standing on my side. Then I saw his name, Daniel. For a moment, I just stared at it. My thumb hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, to drop the phone back on the tray and pretend I'd never seen it. But another part of me needed to hear what he would say now that the whole world knew what his mother had done and what he had failed to do. I answered and stayed silent. Maya, he said, his voice shaky, breathless. I could hear noise in the background: voices, maybe traffic, the sound of a door closing. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would go this far. The video, it's everywhere. My business partners are calling. My father is furious. Clients are asking questions. The company is in chaos. Can we talk? Maybe we can fix this. Maybe we can pretend. I cut in, my voice low and calm, though my hands trembled. Pretend what, Daniel? That your mother didn't slap me in front of everyone? That you didn't sit there and watch? That you didn't sign divorce papers while I was in labor with your child? He went quiet. I heard him inhale sharply, like he'd forgotten I knew the whole story. I was scared. He finally said, everything was happening so fast. My mother said. There it is. I interrupted. Your mother said. I looked over at my daughter in the bassinet, her tiny hand resting on her chest, her lips moving in her sleep like she was dreaming. I thought about the kind of man I wanted her to see me with one day, the kind of love I wanted her to believe she deserved. It sure wasn't a man who hid behind his mother's skirt while his wife bled, cried, and signed discharge papers alone. You lost us, I said, my voice steady, the moment you let her hit me and said nothing. The moment you chose her comfort over my safety. The moment you signed those papers instead of holding my hand. Maya, please, he said, his voice cracking. We can clean this up. Public relations, statements, an apology. My father says if we handle it right, we can fix the damage. We can say we were all emotional. I almost laughed, because there it was again, his real concern. Not me, not our daughter. The damage, the image, the company. I'm not a business problem for you to manage, I said quietly. I'm your wife, or I was, and I'm the mother of your child. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Before he could answer, I pressed the red button and ended the call. My hand was still shaking when I turned the phone all the way off and laid it face down on the tray, as if even the dark screen could reach out and pull me back into the life I was determined to leave. The room felt strangely quiet after that, but the quiet wasn't empty. It felt like a blank page. I looked at my daughter again, her tiny chest rising and falling, her whole future still unwritten. I thought about the hospital bill I couldn't afford, the house I wasn't sure I wanted anymore, the $620 in my checking account and the $200 in my savings. The numbers didn't add up to security. The future looked messy, uncertain, maybe even frightening. But underneath the fear was something else. It was the feeling of a locked door finally swinging open, of air rushing into a room that had been closed for too long, of a life that had been built on someone else's terms cracking apart so I could build something new, even if I had to do it from scratch. That day, in a small hospital room with a viral video playing on loop across America and Europe, I understood something I would never forget. Sometimes betrayal is not just pain. Sometimes betrayal is the door, and on the other side of that door, waiting for me and my daughter, was freedom I hadn't even known how to ask for. The months after I left that big brick house were the hardest of my life, but they were also the first months that felt honest. On the outside, it looked like I was moving backward. I went from a fancy home in an Atlanta suburb to a small rented duplex on the west side of the city. The paint on the walls was chipped, the floors squeaked when you walked down the hallway, and the bathroom door stuck every time you tried to close it. The rent was $900 a month, which felt heavy on my shoulders when I looked at the numbers in my bank account. I shared a bedroom with my daughter, and instead of a dresser, I stacked clear plastic bins against the wall with our clothes folded inside. But every night when I locked the door and turned off the lights, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. No one walked in without knocking. No one insulted me in my own kitchen. No one treated me like a guest in a life I was supposed to be building. Even after I moved, the wedding video didn't disappear. People kept sharing it. It floated around online like a ghost, showing up in new places, on new screens, with new captions. Reporters called, emailed, and left messages asking if I would talk. I ignored most of them at first. I was too busy trying to figure out how to make formula last longer and how to stretch $50 into a week's worth of groceries. But one day, a producer from a talk show in America reached out with something different. They said they would pay me $2,000 to sit down and tell my side of the story. I looked at my daughter sleeping in her second-hand crib and thought about rent, diapers, and medical bills. I said yes. The interview was scary, but also healing. I sat under bright studio lights while a host from a big city in America held my hand and asked me what it felt like to be slapped on my wedding day. I told the truth in simple words, my voice shaking sometimes, but not breaking. When I walked out of the studio with that check in my purse, I knew exactly where the money was going. 3 months of rent, a stack of diapers, wipes, and one of the hospital bills that had been hanging over my head like a dark cloud. The money helped. But what truly started to change my life wasn't the television show. It was the messages. They came from women all over America and even from Europe. Some wrote from small towns I had never heard of, places with only one main street and a diner. Others wrote from big cities like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, telling me they watched the video late at night after long shifts. There were messages from women in London and other European cities, saying they saw the clip online and couldn't stop thinking about it. They told me about partners who never defended them, mothers-in-law who treated them like trash, families who only cared about image and money. They poured their stories into my inbox, some starting with, "I've never told anyone this before." The more I read, the more I realize my story wasn't just mine. I was part of something bigger, a long line of women who had been told to stay quiet and small, and who were slowly, bravely refusing. One night, after putting my daughter to sleep, I sat at the tiny table in our little kitchen with my old laptop. The screen had a small crack in the corner, and the battery only worked if it was plugged in, but it was enough. I opened a blank page and stared at the cursor blinking at me like it was waiting for courage. Then I started writing. I wrote about the ballroom, the slap, the silence from my husband, the early labor, the divorce papers, and the moment I chose myself and my child over that family's name. I wrote the way I would talk to a friend on the phone, no fancy words, no pretending. Just the truth, plain and clear. When I finished, I started a blog and posted my story. At first, only a few people read it. I could see the numbers: 10 visitors, then 20, then 40. It felt small, but it was something. Then one day, a woman with a big following on social media shared the link. Then another woman did the same. Within a few months, my blog had thousands of visitors. Comments poured in from women who said things like, "You wrote the words I never could, and because of you, I finally left." Some people sent $10, $25, or even $100 through a support link I had added almost as an afterthought. They wrote messages like, "For you and your baby," and "Keep telling your story." I kept track of every dollar in a notebook. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to buy groceries without fear and enough to make me feel that my words had real value. One day, an email came in from a publishing company in America. The subject line made my heart jump: book idea. The message was short but clear. The editor said she had read my blog, cried at her desk, and wanted to know if I'd ever thought about writing a book. When I read that line, I laughed out loud. Me? A book? I thought about all the times I'd written poems in notebooks as a teenager, hiding them under my bed. I thought about how I had always loved books, but never imagined my name on the cover of one. Still, the idea wouldn't leave me alone. Our living room in the duplex was small, but when I looked around, I saw more than chipped paint and a sagging couch. I saw my daughter's toys scattered on the floor, her tiny socks on the armrest, and a future that didn't have to depend on anyone else's last name or paycheck. I dreamed of buying a real home one day, a place where my daughter would have her own bed, her own shelf of books, her own space to grow, a place where no one could throw me out because they had more money and more power. So, I wrote back to the editor and said, yes, I've thought about it. Let's talk. Writing that book almost broke me and saved me at the same time. I woke up at a m most days, while the sky over America was still dark and the city was quiet. I wrote while my daughter slept, stopping every hour to nurse her or rock her back to sleep. I wrote during her nap time, my eyes heavy but my mind sharp with memories. At night, when she was finally down for the evening, I opened the laptop again, even when my back hurt and my vision blurred. I wrote about everything: how it felt to stand in that ballroom, how the slap burned my skin, how my heart cracked open in the hospital room, how free and scared I felt in the duplex. I didn't hold back. If I was going to tell this story, I would tell all of it. A year later, I stood in my kitchen holding a contract in my hands. The publishing company offered me $35,000 as an advance to write my full story and add advice for women on protecting their hearts, their money, and their sense of self. When I saw the number, my knees almost gave out. I leaned over the table and cried into my hands, the papers shaking under my fingers. My daughter, now wobbling around the living room on unsteady legs, toddled over and grabbed my calf. I bent down, scooped her up, and pressed my face into her soft hair. "Mommy did it," I whispered, my voice thick. "We're going to be okay." When the book finally came out, people bought it not just because of the drama of the wedding, but because they saw themselves in my pain and in my decision to walk away. Women in cities all across America sent me photos of the book on their coffee tables, in their kitchens, on their nightstands. Messages came in from Europe too, from readers who said they had stayed up all night turning the pages. One teacher wrote that she had only 40 pounds left after paying her bills that month, but she still chose to buy my book because it gave her hope. I sat with that message for a long time, humbled by the idea that my pain could be turned into something that might help someone else feel less alone. 2 years after that awful wedding day, I found myself standing in front of a little white house in New Orleans, a city I had always wanted to live in. It wasn't big or perfect, but it was charming. The porch had an old swing hanging from rusty chains, the paint peeled in spots, and the roof needed work. But when I walked through the front door, I could see everything it could become. I saw a nursery painted soft yellow, a living room filled with photos of my daughter and me, and a kitchen where no one rolled their eyes at my favorite mug. With money from the book, the speaking events I had started doing, and every extra dollar I had saved, I was able to put down $25,000 as a down payment. When the papers were signed, my hands shook again, but this time it was from joy, not fear. My daughter ran into the empty living room, her small shoes tapping on the wooden floor. She spun in a circle, her laugh bouncing off the bare walls. "Is this our house, Mama?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Yes," I said, my throat tight and my heart full. "This is our house. No one can take it from us." I didn't end up with the rich husband or the powerful family name. I didn't keep the first fancy house that everyone said I was lucky to live in. Instead, I got something better. I got myself. I got my voice. I got a life where my child will never see her mother stay silent while someone disrespects her. Now, when I stand on my small porch in New Orleans and feel the evening wind on my face, I think back to that slap in the ballroom in Atlanta. Back then, I thought it was the end of my story. Now I know it was the beginning. Betrayal pushed me through a painful door, but on the other side, I found a woman I didn't know I could be strong, steady, and free. And every time I tell this story, whether on a stage, on a page, or across a kitchen table, I'm not just talking about my life. I'm reminding someone somewhere that they can walk through their own door too.